All right. Welcome into Jake's Takes. I'm your host, Jake Masucci, and we had some unbelievable college football today. I mean, flat out unreal. The playoff was here. We had Michigan, Alabama at 5 o'clock, and then we had Washington and Texas. Washington and Texas just finished in an unbelievable game where I actually did not think it was going to come down that close, and some crazy plays happened. And goodness gracious, I love college football. Like, this playoff has been so sensational, unbelievable to watch. And I mean, it's been the past two playoff semifinals that have just been so great to watch and like fun games to have. So I was pumped. I mean, these were a lot of fun, and we're gonna go through them today. So I want to start with Michigan, Alabama, because that game was just unbelievable, dude. Like, I was talking about it a lot with my buddies and stuff. If you guys don't know, like, I hadn't been doing the podcast too much because like finals and stuff like that, manager stuff. I'd been traveling a lot. So I hadn't been able to like really like zero in on college football too much. And there was a long break, so like a lot of it was like, okay, the last week we're going to kind of look at matchups and like see what you should kind of expect from the games and like what things you should look at. And with both these teams, it's the secondary, man. Like, the secondary for both teams is just flat out unbelievable. And I'll just name some names off right now. Like, we've talked about Michigan's defense throughout the whole year. You guys know I'm a Michigan fan, so right now I'm on like cloud nine. It's unbelievable. It's 12:56 right now when I'm recording this, so I'm a little tired. Maybe it doesn't sound like I'm on cloud nine, but like, I feel good. Will Johnson is just flat out unbelievable. He is a monster, dude, and he really showed it throughout this whole game, shutting down Jermaine Burton, who I was really high on. Connor and I talked a lot about him and how much we like him, and he was just unbelievable in this game. Mike Sandstrill, unbelievable corner. I mean, he's just flat out insane. I do not say his last name right, but a lot of these guys, I don't say their last name right. I mean, the Michigan defense really came to play today, and they came to prove why they're a number one defense, and like, they really showed it, allowing 20 points to Alabama in an overtime game. Like, really just an unbelievable performance by them, and we'll kind of go through it throughout the game, but I'll throw some stat lines at you right now. Jalen Milroe was 16 for 23, 116 yards. Really, I think Michigan did a great job, like, taking away his first option and making him think. They threw some exotic blitzes at him in the first half and had 5 sacks in the first half, and that made it really tough. They really exposed that offensive line for what we were worried about when we talked with Connor at the beginning of the year. Like, Texas's D line was a lot for Alabama's O line to handle, and Michigan really kind of showed that with their exotic blitzes and things of that nature. Like, Brandon Graham on the defensive tackle, I believe it's Brandon Graham, but Graham's the last name. He's just an animal, flat out animal. My brothers were telling him about me. They were telling him about, like, they were telling me this guy is just unreal, and that he was a must watch. And he shocked me. Like, he's just unbelievable and played unbelievable in this game. He won defensive player of the game for this game, and he was sensational. Like, looking at that, one thing Michigan did struggle with a little bit was handling Jace McClellan, which kind of makes sense because he had really been coming on with his running. He had 14 carries, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns. It was kind of shocking to me that Alabama didn't keep going to the run, because I really think they did a good job of figuring that out and getting it going in the second half. They really started out strong with that. And they were able to get some receiving going on with Isaac Bond. Isaac Bond had a good game with 4 receptions, 47 yards. But Jermaine Burton was kind of like locked down. I like what they do with Bond. They use him in the slot, and they also use him outside. And he's just a very athletic guy. I believe he's coming back next year. He is a sophomore, so he wouldn't be eligible yet. He's going to be a dangerous receiver for them coming in next year, because they'll have Milroe back, and like, it'll be all right. With Milroe, I was talking about how Michigan, I really think they did a great job of taking away his first option, making him think, throwing some blitzes at him that confused him. You saw Will Johnson a lot of the time on the outside, like, getting right to him. And I thought Milroe did a solid job of like looking him off and like trying to make plays with the screen pass. He had a couple screen passes to Burden when Johnson went to blitz. He had a couple screen passes to Bond, but there was nothing he could get downfield, which I thought Michigan did a great job being able to take away that. He didn't have time in the pocket to kind of settle himself and go through his reads and use that deep ball, because he's a very good deep ball thrower, and we didn't see that much from Milroe today. So I thought that was an excellent job by Michigan. Milroe in the running game, however, he was really good. I mean, 63 yards, and he got sacked like 7 times. So that's a very good stat line to me. And he's so fast, so big, so fast. For me, like, a lot of people are gonna discredit Milroe and be like he didn't play a good game, and I'm not saying he did play a good game, but I think if you're an Alabama fan, there's a lot that he's going to be able to improve on and just get better, because you saw throughout the whole year he just got so much better and better and better. And yes, this is a tough loss, tough pill to swallow, but if I'm an Alabama fan and I'm looking at Jalen Milroe, I'm kind of happy in the fact that, like, I think he can get a lot better and become the guy that you need him to become going into next year. So that would be my take on Milroe. With some of your other guys, you should be excited about Isaac Bond, and we'll get to your defense, because I think Alabama's defense was flat out sensational and really showed why they're one of the top defenses in college football as well. And Connor and I talked about that a lot too when we had that podcast. I think Connor's podcast would be a great podcast to listen to if you want to talk about SEC football, because we kind of covered Bama mostly, just because he's from Bama and like knows them. And I talked to him recently, like, about previewing this game and the off camera, like what we should expect. And we talked about Milroe and the inconsistency. It was going to be who's going to play better at the quarterback position. And looking at JJ's stat line, JJ really turned in a great performance to me. A lot of people will be like, oh my gosh, like, especially first play of the game, like JJ goes in right away. There's a horrible ball and is picked off. And thank God Downs was out of bounds. And Downs is an unbelievable corner for Alabama. I didn't give him enough credit talking about him earlier in the year, because like he wasn't really making a statement, but later in the year he really made a statement, and it was an unbelievable corner. That was a great pick, and I was so scared. Like, that was the one moment throughout this whole game, because everybody knows here that I'm a Michigan fan. That was the one moment in this game where I was like, oh boy, this could get ugly. If Michigan started out like that, I just wasn't sure how they would be able to respond and like get back going. But once that pick was taken off the board, I was like, okay, new start, fresh start. And Blake Corum throughout this game, just incredible. 19 carries in this game, 83 yards and a touchdown. Just a monster, dude. Really, he had a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown, and he's just the heart and soul of Michigan, man. Like, this guy, it's hard to describe, because I feel like he's just going to be one of those guys that's remembered forever in the Michigan lore, because like this performance, him coming back, him being the man in this playoff, he's the guy that we needed. TCU, we were missing something. You could definitely tell, like, Michigan just wasn't Michigan. And the fact of the matter is Michigan's not Michigan without Blake Corum. And that's the reason kind of why we saw Michigan turn into Michigan and be that tough-nosed team, because he's that tough-nosed player. He'll get in there and really give you a tough time. Talking about the offensive line was great in their blocking scheme, I think, today. JJ created some plays, but I also think the O-line did a fantastic job of giving some holes for Corum. Like, Corum had some unbelievable runs in this game, had 4 yards per carry, which is what you want. And against this Alabama defensive line, like, that's very impressive, especially with Dallas Turner on the edge, who's an unbelievable edge, probably going to be a top 5 pick. I've talked about him a lot. He's one of my favorite defensive players probably coming out in this draft class. So he's unbelievable. And, looking at Michigan, like Roman Wilson at the end of the game, especially that near that last drive, like, just had some unbelievable catches, 4 receptions, 73 yards, a touchdown. Tyler Morris had that great play down the middle off of JJ's dime. And let's talk about JJ's performance a little bit. I think a lot of people at the beginning of the game was like JJ is not looking great, like, I guess, like, we should expect more, blah, 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 blah. But 226 or 21 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 picks. I don't care like who you are. That's a great performance. And when we needed him most, he stepped up. And I think in college, especially, what you want is your quarterback to be able to step up in those big moments. And JJ has shown time and time again that he is able to do that. Ohio State was probably his best game of the season, where he just showed up, threw the best balls he possibly could, and got the job done. And he's continuing to do that. Everybody knows here on this podcast that I am one of the biggest JJ guys. And that's because before he got there, nobody else was able to get us to where we wanted to go. Cade got us to the playoff, and he did a fantastic job in doing that. But the thing is like, it was clear to every Michigan fan that JJ just had something. He has that it factor. And that's, I think, the reason why, like, even with 221, 3 touchdowns, and, him, like, throwing into coverage, and you're like, God, that's not a great throw. But the thing is like, you don't want anybody else at the helm because he's able to create these plays. Like, the play in the second quarter where they hand off to Edwards, and Edwards throws it back to JJ, and JJ makes an unbelievable one-hand catch and throws it deep. That was an unbelievable play. I believe he threw it to Morris on that play, but that was just a ridiculous play. Absolutely ridiculous. And nobody else can make that play. Nobody else in college football is able to make that throw in that tough a position. There's very few, at least. I think Caleb Williams might be one. But, like, dude, he's unbelievable. I really do believe that he is a first-round talent as a quarterback. And, I thought he played great in this game. I thought he was ready for what Alabama was able to throw at him. Alabama has one of the best secondaries in football. They have one of the best D-line in football. Connor and I talked about it off camera before the game. We were like, I told him, I was like, Michigan is deeper on defense, so that means I think they're a better defense. But Alabama has more talent on the defensive end. And that's because of guys like Dallas Turner, Downs, and Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's I didn't even mention, but he's one of the best corners in college football as well, and probably going to be a top pick in the draft. So, like, those 3 guys, that's star power right there. And Alabama always has that star power. They get those 5 stars. They get those guys that you're like, geez, I'm scared of those guys. And that's why Alabama is just such a threatening name, So, with that defense, JJ just wasn't phased, and he was able to create plays and create things. And Ohio State's defense is another one of those defense where they're one of the best in college football. And, like, they showed it against Missouri, even though Missouri won that game. And that was a weird game. Like, bowl games are weird, but Ohio State's defense still allowed 14 points to a Missouri offense that was cooking everybody else throughout the whole year. So, like, I think defenses in the Big Ten were kind of for real. I mean, Iowa fell off because Tennessee, they got a great offense over there. Josh Heupel has a great system. And then Penn State's fell off because Lane Kiffin really started to figure them out. And their defensive coordinator left, and all that stuff. But I really think the defenses were for real in the Big Ten. We didn't see, like, too many great offenses. And that's where, like, playing a team, the Washington was able to beat Texas. If you guys didn't watch that game, and we'll get to that game in a second. But that's where teams, even like Texas or Washington, would be interesting matchup for Michigan. And the fact that Michigan hasn't seen an offense that, like, high-powered and that skilled. So that will be really an interesting test for their defense, at least. But I do think the secondary is good enough to be able to hold, like, great passing teams to a little bit less to what they're used to. The D line has shown that they're able to affect the pass, like, able to get to the passer. 7 sacks in this game is just unbelievable. They really took advantage of a young offensive line, which we talked about on when we had Connor on, about how young Alabama's offensive line was and how much of a struggle it was, at least at the beginning of the year. And they hadn't seen a defensive line like Michigan since that Texas game. I think Michigan and Texas clearly had the 2 best defensive lines. And the thing that's worrisome, and we'll get to Washington, but Washington has the best O-line in the country. They won the Joe Moore Award, and they're just fantastic, like unbelievable. Um, so that's going to be tough for the Michigan defensive line. But overall, with Michigan, I think, like program wise, this is just an unbelievable win. Unbelievable. It's something off Harbaugh's shoulders. It's so great for Harbaugh, and I really think this is just an unbelievable win for the Michigan program. All right. So I talked about that game for a decent amount, and I kind of wanted to like go through the drives and stuff, but I can't believe I went 15 minutes talking about just like highlights of the game and what I thought. So I guess I'll do the same thing for Texas Washington. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Washington was able to sneak out of this game 37-31. Looking at the stats, if you're looking at the box score, Quinn Ewers had 318, 1 touchdown, 0 picks. The thing is, with this game and with Quinn Ewers' stat line, I feel like it's a little misleading in the fact that, like, I feel like he could have played a little bit better. He went 24 for 43, like, throwing the ball, which is a little over 50%. He's normally in the 70% range, and it seemed like with some of his throws, it just wasn't there, especially on that last drive. Like, he had a couple throws. The last throw of the game, for example, like, he could have zipped it in there in that one-on-one coverage, and I feel like they could have came down with it and almost won that game, He threw some unbelievable balls throughout the whole game, but let's be real with Washington's defense. They're not the greatest against the pass. They haven't been throughout the whole year. And a lot of people say, oh, it's because they throw a lot of balls, they're always up. So teams are always throwing against them. But it's also because they've had some corner weaknesses and things of that nature. But all the quarterbacks in the Pac-12 have been able to have some success against them. That's why they've played so many close games and why it's been so interesting to watch Washington throughout the whole year, because they're always in close games. My brother told me a great stat where they've won 10 straight games where it was only a 10-point game. There was a 10-point margin, and they're the first team in FBS history to do that. Like, that just shows you that they know how to win. They know how to win those close games, and they just figure it out. They figure it out. And this was another very impressive win. Talking about Washington's defense a little bit, I think they did a solid job against the run, but I do think like playing against a team like Michigan who can run and pound it is going to be very difficult for them, because Texas had a couple backs that were able to have some great success against them. CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue both ended up with 9 carries. Baxter was 64 yards, Blue with 59 yards, and both of them had a touchdown. Quinn Ewers also added 54 yards to that. That's a lot of yards against the run, and I'm sure there's going to be adjustments, and I'm sure they're going to figure out stuff, and we'll cover that when we cover the championship game. But, looking at it that way, I feel like it's just going to be tricky for them if Texas is able to run that well against the Washington defensive front. There's definitely going to have to be some adjustments for guys like Corum and Edwards. Edwards wasn't really used much, but that's just because of the fact that Corum was just so useful in that game and so needed. Edwards wasn't needed as much, but he's still a vital factor, and it's someone that you can't like forget about. So I really think if you're looking at it from Washington's like defensive front perspective, it's that way. But I also think their corners and their safeties, they have this mindset where they're physical. And those linebackers are very physical as well. You could tell throughout the whole game that they wanted to set a physical tone. And this was also in the Oregon game. They set a physical tone right away, coming in with a bang, like a flat out bang. And I really think with Washington, they're going to have that mindset and try to set that physical edge. But the thing is Michigan's the most physical team in college football. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see that aspect of it. I could see a lot of trash talk to start the game and see like who can get the edge that way. That's kind of my take on the Washington defense. If I'm looking at, I talked about Quinn Ewers a little bit. Another guy that impressed me on the Texas receiving core is Xavier Worthy, and he's someone that you could definitely look for next year. A lot of people think he could find his way in the NFL draft. I'm not sure about that. He's a junior, but he impressed me. He's very fast, and he could be a very good threat for Quinn Ewers to have next year. I think it would be in Quinn Ewers' best interest to come back develop, get better, and be that starting quarterback next year. He's already gotten a lot better from year 1 to year 2. We talked about that a lot with Connor after the Alabama-Texas game. And I really think he could develop even more, get a lot better. They made it to the playoff. They did their job. They won the Big 12. Now you're moving over to the SEC. You're going to have a very difficult schedule next year. You're playing Michigan. You're playing all these SEC schools. It's going to be hard. I really think having him come back, make it to that 12-team playoff, maybe it's just going to be a completely different year. There's a lot more chances to have success. And, there's not as much pressure on you. So I think coming back, being able to develop, you'll probably be the number 1 quarterback going out next year. That's probably a possibility. Him and Shedeur Sanders probably would be fighting for that top spot, I think, in NFL standards. So I think that would be very interesting to watch and see from Texas's perspective on the offensive end. All right, Washington offense. Let's talk about it a little bit. Michael Penix, dude, holy cow. He went 29 for 38, 430 passing, and 2 touchdowns. And some of the deep balls he was throwing, and I say this every game. I said it when I went to go watch Washington against Michigan State. His deep balls are so accurate, and it's just unreal to watch. He got Nduze involved, he got Polk involved, he got McMillan involved. I mean, this guy's unreal. Nduze had 6 receptions, 125. Jalen Polk had 5 receptions, 122. And these guys are just so talented. Some of the catches they make they just make it look so easy. So easy. And it's also because of this offensive line. The offensive line hasn't gotten enough credit throughout the whole year. Once they won the Joe Moore Award, everybody looked at them and was like, okay, they're the reason, because they really set the edge. They make it so much easier for Penix. There were so many times throughout the game today where I was like, oh, he had 7 seconds to throw that ball. And that's just ridiculous, talking about an offensive line that way, being able to do that, especially against the Texas defensive line that gave Alabama fits. I mean, absolute fits. And Michigan just did that to Alabama as well. So that's why I think that Michigan defensive line versus the Washington offensive line is going to be a very interesting matchup to look at. And the Washington offense versus the Michigan defense is definitely something. Those receivers against those corners, whoo, man. I mean, I really think that'll be interesting. And Dunze versus Will Johnson would be something special. And I really think that this matchup might be one of the best we see. And it could be that, or it could be Penix goes for 500 yards and they whoop Michigan. It really could. I don't see any universe where Michigan absolutely dominates Washington, because I really think both offenses are going to be able to score when they match up, because Michigan's, I think, is going to be able to run the football. Washington hasn't been a team that's been able to lock down the run. And I really think Michigan's offensive line is better than Washington's defensive line, which is going to help Corum get some holes and get some edges. I think Donovan Edwards could have a good game as well. And Michigan will be able to pass as well, because Washington isn't the best pass defense. And Michigan has figured something out with their passing. Roman Wilson with another solid game. They're able to get Colson Loveland involved a little bit. I think that'll be helpful. But overall, man, I'm super pumped for this final. I really think it's just unbelievable. And talking a little bit more about the Washington-Texas game, going down at the end of the game, I got to talk about special teams for both Washington and Michigan, okay? End of the game in the Washington game. It's 31-37. Washington has the ball. It's their 3rd down, and they give it to their running back, Dylan Johnson, who's really good. And Dylan Johnson runs for 2 yards, and he gets hurt. That's going to be something to look for in the championship game, by the way. But he gets hurt, and Texas has no timeouts left. So they weren't going to have a timeout. The clock goes down to 43 seconds and has to stop. And Washington has to use a timeout for the injury. If the injury doesn't happen, the time's going to go down to 15 seconds, and then Washington's going to take the delay of game and punt. Now they have to punt with 45 seconds. So then they punt it, and then their punt team hits the guy returning it. The guy returning it tries to catch it, and he hits him in the shoulder while he's catching it. So that's 15 yards. There you go, 15 yards. Then Texas gets a first down. Then Texas goes a deep ball, gets it to the 30. Then Texas goes a short ball, gets it to the 10. Now you got 10 seconds left. Texas at the 10, and then 2 incomplete passes, and they lose the game. So that just kind of made it a game, made it really, really interesting. Michigan, on the other hand, like showed a lot of problems. And if you're talking about the Michigan-Alabama game, there were 2 problems on both ends. One was Michigan's special teams. Alabama's problem was Alabama's center, because Alabama's center had a lot of missed snaps. Even the last play where they called QB blasts in overtime, he threw it to Milroe low. Michigan's problem was their special teams. They started out the game with the interception that JJ threw that wasn't an interception because he was out of bounds. But then they Alabama went 3 and out. Alabama punted, and it goes right through our punt returner's hands. He's a true freshman, tough moment there. And then later in the game, we change punt returners for the last punt, and it's 2020 in this situation, and it goes through his hands, and he has to recover it at the 1. So, like, I saw so many people joking on Twitter, like, imagine if Michigan loses this game because of a safety. And we were able to get like 1 yard and knee it out to force it into overtime. But these are like 2 things. And Michigan missed the extra point as well. So you make that extra point, then Michigan wins that game by 1. It's just 2 things that need to be taken care of in the special teams. Special teams is so important. It's so important. And everybody knows that. But it's just stuff that can be overlooked, And Michigan also missed the field goal. Like, it's definitely going to be interesting. I think it's more of a problem on the Michigan end than the Washington end. But Washington end, it was just a sloppy finish. And in that Washington-Texas game, they're lucky that Texas was one of the most penalized teams in college football, because Texas had like 10 penalties in that game. Really just kicked themselves in the foot throughout the whole game, and it made it more difficult on themselves. So I really think this Michigan-Washington game is going to be very interesting. I'm going to try to do a full breakdown possibly on the podcast. We'll see where it gets. But overall, this playoff has been so much fun, and I'm looking forward to the championship game next Monday.